Hello, everybody, and bienvenue to our press conference with our Group President, Iratxe García Perez, for this plenary session. And it's my pleasure to hand over to her, and then afterwards we will, of course, have time for your questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we've changed the usual time slot for our press conference because this morning we had a key debate. So we tried to avoid parallel activities during these very important debates, which is why we decided to move the press conference to this afternoon. I imagine that you already more or less know what the agenda for this plenary is, what sessions have been discussed, what is going to be discussed in the future sections. And if we want to focus on what our group thinks is most important is this morning's vote on the Pact 55. Following months of negotiations, we finally managed with this vote to conclude the negotiations that you well know have been complex. I think we should congratulate ourselves in the EU and thank everyone for the hard work on these dossiers. And without the leadership of our political group, possibly the outcome would have been not as good. And so I think today we can celebrate the fact that the large majority has voted in favor of this package with the ETS, CBAN, and the Social Climate Fund. These were objectives that we already and always set out to make Europe the leader in fighting climate change. And I think also that having invested in this time change, there's another key issue, which is the reform of fiscal rules, because they might determine the future of the transition to a more sustainable future, both economically and environmentally, because this sustainability criterion is not just an economic one. We bring forward the fact that we need to be sustainable also environmentally and socially. And so this reform is what Europe needs. We're still waiting for the European Commission's proposal on this. And this afternoon, we're going to have Paolo Gentiloni at the meeting of our political group to see whether we can get an inkling of what the broad strokes of this European Commission proposal on fiscal reform will be. Then there's the IPP decision to indict Putin for criminal war acts. And this was one of the main subjects of the S&D mission to Ukraine. You know that a couple of weeks ago, there was a delegation from our group. We had very high-level meetings with the executive, with President Zelensky, with representatives of various ministries and civil society. And account was one of the main issues, as well as how Europe can continue to support Ukraine and how we can continue to help Ukraine economically, in humanitarian aspects, militarily, to work for a fundamental unity in Europe so that we can maintain our supportive position. This morning, as you know, we had a key debate on China. In such a complex international situation, it is very important that we have a consistent and united position vis-à-vis China. And the S&D group keeps insisting that we need a strategic autonomy in Europe. And this strategic autonomy is not incompatible, nor should it be, with a transatlantic partnership. Our strength, our big strength, is our unity, and our weakness is to be put in the middle of two leading countries that have different positions on China. So the debate was more on the confrontation, whereas it should be on how to strengthen our united front to support and defend our basic values, and how we can defend common interests with China on the environment, on trade, on human rights, because these common interests will never be paid for by giving up basic European values. So we have to find a position that allows us to progress. And then we also had a strategic debate on the budget for next year. And on this, let me spend a few words, because you will have heard me say a lot of times that not €1 of the EU budget should be earmarked to build walls. And this was the majority position coming out of the budget committee works. And so I'm quite worried that the EPP is still working to break this consensus in the budget committee, presenting amendments that might not follow this position. For me, this decision might change our final vote on the report, because for the Socialist group, if the ECR and EPP amendments to use EU money to build walls might shift our vote. It will be a key vote. I think we need to keep debating in this House on migration. We have to be clear on what position we defend. Ours is very clear. Since the beginning, we've always talked about solidarity among member states to support countries subject to the greatest migratory pressures, and solidarity with people who flee from war, poverty, and whatever. We don't want to do like Mr. Weber, who in the morning gets up and says, we're not going to build walls, and in the afternoon he says, well, we need to do so. EU citizens don't expect nor want the EU political class to keep changing what they stand for. So we would really want the EPP to be more consistent on the political view. Next week, the S&D group will have a group meeting in Krakow. This is an important time for Poland and the EU. We want to support the left in Poland to also defend the rule of law in Europe. So we will keep you informed on the meetings and the agenda that we will have on that mission.
Gracias, Iratxe. And now it is time for your questions. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions?
Are there any questions?
Quelqu'un? Everything so clear. Wow. Yes, one, Eddie.
Thanks, Eddie from Politico. Do you really think that there's any chance that this amendment will pass on the idea of using EU money to build kind of migrant fences?
You never know. For the vote. In any case, we can see for other opportunities with the vote that if we have a pro-European alliance between the different groups like S&D, Greens, Left, and Renew, we can build a majority in this parliament. But in any case, we need to wait and to know what will happen in this concrete issue. I think that it's possible, but we cannot be sure. And Thursday vote, not everybody maybe will be in the plenary session, and we have to wait. And what is important for us is that it's a key vote for a key issue for us to include this mention about no European funds to build walls. And if finally these amendments are adopted, we cannot vote the final report.
But the head of the Renew Europe group has accused your group of kind of falling into the logic, falling into the trap of the EPP and the ECR by even suggesting, by suggesting an alternative title for this debate. Do you agree with that? Do you think that maybe you should have just boycotted the entire subject?
Bueno, Renew siempre intenta.
No, Renew always tries to be, the big brother trying to get the other two to agree. I mean, that is the role it is playing right now. That's its political strategy. But what is important for me personally is for us to be consistent. I mean, that political group has never dodged the debate on the problem of migratory flows in some of our countries. And so I think that's why it's so important that we have a debate on this subject. I mean, we couldn't do that on the basis of the title that had been put forward by the EPP, and that is why we were seeking to propose a title that could bring us all together in that debate. And, we were happy to be able to convince people to support our proposal for that debate.
And afterwards, Eleonora. So now questions?
Yes, thank you. David Carretta, Radio Radicale. It's I would say, a personal question. We are hearing that maybe you will be a candidate in the Spanish elections. I'm wondering if it's correct, or are you going to stay until the end of this current mandate? Thank you.
Tienen presidenta de grupo.
They've had female presidents of the SD for a lot of time. So as Iratxe García, we have a lot of work to do, and I am 100% dedicated to create a more just Europe.
Hello, I'm Eleonora from Euractiv. I have a question that is not directly connected with the current debates, but it's a question that is not on the agenda for, at least not in the political perception, the political debate, which is the reform of the treaties to, face different crises, such as the war in Ukraine, the Taiwan crisis, but also migration and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering whether a group as the Socialists and Democrats would put a little bit of more will to rediscuss the reform of the treaty, to push politically. I know that in AFCO there are the stuff going on, but realistically we know that the Council is not very happy to discuss. So maybe more political pressure, from the biggest groups would put the question again in the EU agenda in general. Thank you so much.
Well, as you say quite rightly yourself, this is nothing new. I mean, we've already seen this in the past. I mean, this group has been spearheading this debate for some considerable time now, certainly during the Conference on the Future of Europe. I mean, I think we had a very clear-cut position there. We need Europe to change. We need Europe to move more quickly, and it may well be that we need to weigh up some institutional changes if we are to be able to forge ahead. And that is something that the S&D group are prepared to do, but we're very much aware of the fact that we can't do it on our own. We can't do it on our own in this Parliament, and we can't do it alone as a political family. And that is why, absolutely, you would need a broad agreement between the leading political forces in Europe if we are to get anywhere when it comes to amending the treaties and making Europe perhaps more agile than it is now. We can't do it on our own. That's my answer, really.
Okay. A final, yes, please go ahead. We still have some time. Can you please put on your mic and introduce yourself?
Sorry, yes. Adwan pour uw briefs. Est-ce que la puissance de...
Is China's weight as an economic and international player, and given the relationship between the EU and China, does this mean that it's more important to keep good relations between the EU and China? Will Macron's declaration have an impact?
I think it would be.
Can you give me more detail about the question? Because
En fait,
Well, China is an international heavyweight economically and politically. The EU has good relations with China and common interests. If we've signed this agreement, aren't we risking jeopardize these good relations?
que no sé a qué acuerdo, a qué firma de acuerdos está.
Well, I don't know what particular agreement you're referring to.
A ver, voy a intentar responder así más a nivel.
Well, I'll do my best to give you a more general reply. I mean, I do think it would be a good thing if we were to have another look at the debate today in the chamber. Now, of course, I wasn't able to listen to it all, but I would invite all of you to listen carefully to what the High Representative said, you know, talking about all of this complexity, talking about the need to strike the right balance. I mean, of course, we want to have a relationship within which we can tackle common challenges, you know, be it the climate or human rights or anything to do with fiscal matters and economic development. You know, that is not incompatible with our red lines as laid down in the debate. Red lines, of course, which have to do with the defense of Ukraine and, of course, with the fundamental rights here in the European Union. So, you know, it's striking the right balance. I mean, I think that's what, you know, is on the table right now.
Please go ahead. Please introduce yourself, please.
Piotr Kaczyński from Onet in Poland. I have a question because you mentioned you're going to Krakow, and why Poland? And if there's a special message that you'd like to convene on the rule of law, for example, there's just this latest example of how the Polish government violates EU legislation, trade policy, with banning, massive banning of all agricultural goods from Ukraine. If you could comment on that too. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. With this last question, we are aware of the effects that the situation might have on some countries for food insecurity, but we cannot approve unilateral decisions of single member states. We need to be supportive and in full solidarity of countries that are suffering from the food crisis. However, it must not be done through unilateral decisions that go against a common position. And why Poland? Yes, the defense of the rule of law and of human rights are a priority. And we want to raise our voice in a country that is limiting rights of women, for example, that is backtracking on a lot of social steps forwards and conquests. So any support we can give to those who are trying to limit this damage being done, we'd be happy to do. And so we're going to meet with a lot lot of civil society representatives, especially representatives of women's groups.
Thank you very much, Iratxe. Thank you very much to all of you. And in case of any questions, don't hesitate to come back. Merci.